All right, everybody. Hey, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully, just hopefully, we're going to actually have time for discussion groups tonight. We're not going to go until 8:20 like it sometimes can happen whenever we have discussion groups, all right? So we're going to get right into the sermon now, and then we'll have time for discussion groups. It's going to be super good tonight. So a little, again, life update. Still no child yet. We're still here, right? Chloe's not here tonight because Shiloh took a little bit later of a nap, right? So no worries. She didn't have a child and I'm up here or something like that. But next week is the due date, so we would appreciate your prayers for Chloe and for Graham, our son, soon to be here. Can't wait to bring him, introduce him to y'all and all that stuff. So that'll be fun. I'll keep you up to date in the Discord. Don't worry. I'll have to send a pic whenever he's born, so you're going to want to be dialed in for that one, right? So next week is the due date. Again, would truly appreciate your prayers for that. But for tonight, we've got an awesome one, I'm telling you. So if you have your hand out, please make sure you're holding on to that for our series that we've been going through for This is the Greatest Thing of All Time, right? We've been talking about the Psalms. We've been talking about praising God, how God has given us the ability to bring praise to things, right? That is a gift that He has given you, a light. And with that light that you have, you can shine it towards different things, right? Just because you give praise to different things does not make you a bad person, right? We're not saying, hey, don't you dare praise anything. No, we need to make sure we're using our light and praising things that are praiseworthy, right? So as we're talking about this is the greatest thing of all time, last week we talked about the God of peace with you in your anxiety, right? And man, I'm telling you, it was very encouraging for me, even just in preparing it and thinking through anxieties that I experience and anxieties that I've talked to people that they have, and then figuring out how does God meet you there in your anxiety? What do you do whenever you're overwhelmed? What do you do, right? And so we talked about how whenever we give our anxieties to God, He will guard our hearts and guard our minds, right? And so it is to be our responsibility to voice our anxieties in prayer to God, right? So tonight we're kind of in the same vein, but slightly different. Our sermon for tonight is titled this: The God of Wonders with You in Your Depression. All right? So slightly similar, but different. Different vein we're working in here, right? So the God of wonders with you in your depression, right? So again, this whole sermon title right here is very specific. Like we've talked about last week, the God of wonders. We talked about the God of peace. This is His character. This is who He is. He's a God of peace, a God of ease, a God that brings calm to where there is chaos. And so this right here, the God of wonders, the God who does great things, the God who does miracles, right? It's very easy for us to be like, oh yeah, that was like back in the day that miracles happened, but not now, right? That was for a different time, but not today. I think that might be one of the most destructive ways of thinking in today's day and age. If we say, hey, God used to do miracles, but He doesn't do them anymore. Let's not be the group of people that say that. We ought to be the people that say, God does wonders still today. God does miracles still today. It wasn't just for an old time, but no, He still does them today, right? So the God of wonders, and then again, with you. I just cannot hammer home that two-word phrase enough. With you. The God who is seated on the throne, yet omnipresent, and is with you even in your depression. So you think about what characterizes depression, and often the feelings of loneliness, often the feelings of isolation, often the feelings of darkness, and there's no light. Those are often some pictures that people give about it. And I think just to put some more words to what depression is it's an exhaustion, right? So if you've ever experienced depression, you might characterize it as an exhaustion. And I would say depression comes whenever you are spiritually exhausted. whenever you've asked the questions to God and you've heard no answer back and you feel exhausted. You feel like God is putting heavy burdens on you. You feel like God would never hear your prayers. You're spiritually exhausted. I think depression also comes whenever you are emotionally exhausted. Whenever you have been spent in anger or in sadness or whatever it might be, you feel exhausted afterwards, right? And even mentally exhausted. Whenever the racing thoughts just keep on going, the what if scenarios, the why scenarios, and all of the questions, whenever you are mentally exhausted, you are going to find yourself in a depression, right? So if we were all honest with ourselves, I think we could say, yeah, I've experienced that. Or you might say, yeah, I know someone who is walking through that or who has walked through that. So if you have not personally walked through this, don't check out on this, right? Because this is very important to know. Even how do I relate to someone who says, I'm depressed? Because it's not just like, I'm sad. It's not just like, hey, just cheer up, things will get better. That right there, not curing anyone's depression right there, honestly, right? If you've ever been depressed and someone said, hey, like, just try being happy, like, think of good things. You're like, okay, like, I haven't done any of that stuff. Like, I've never tried to do any of that. So we're talking at a deeper level than just like, hey, cheer up, pal. It's all going to turn around. Don't worry about it, right? That's not where we're headed tonight, right? But another thing is whenever you're even physically exhausted, it can lead to a sense of depression. So an exhaustion in all of the senses can lead towards this feeling of like, I'm in a dark tunnel and there might be a light way down there at the end, but like, ain't no way I could ever get to it, right? These are all the things that I'm talking about whenever I say the God of wonders with you in your exhaustion, right? So, what does the God of wonders mean? Anybody, whenever you hear the God of wonders, what comes to your mind? Shout it out. Anybody? God of wonders. Have you ever heard that phrase? No. Anybody? Shout out. All right. God of wonders. If you haven't heard it, what do you think it might mean? What? He's wonderful. So sweet. What is wonderful? Amazing. There you go. Awesome. He can do good things, okay? Miraculous, yeah. Beautiful. Shout out. Anybody else? God of wonders. What would you think that means whenever you're thinking of God? The God of wonders. What does that God do? Shout out to like the 2000 song. God of wonders, classic. Who is that? Chris. Probably Chris Tom. It's in the 2000s, Chris Tom. I'm talking past everyone here, huh? It was on, it's true. It was on the Jesus Music movie. Shout out, great movie. God of wonders. What does that mean? What would that look like? What does that God do? Miracles?
A wonder is something that's like you don't anticipate it. It's either extremely beautiful or something you wouldn't have thought of.
Love it.
Because it's full of wonder.
Love it.
Like awe.
Yeah.
In my mind.
Yes.
The God of that.
The God of the awe. Yes. He has created something that would take your breath away. Has anybody ever been to the Grand Canyon? Raise your hand. A couple people. I have not. Love to go. Anybody ever been to like the mountains? There you go. Shout out Niagara Falls. Anybody ever been there? Me and Chloe just watched the Office episode of that the other day, and we were like, gotta go there one day. Shout out. Probably none of y'all watch The Office. It's all right. There you go. So, the God of wonders, this thing that like takes your breath away. You're like, how in the world can this even be? This is bigger than any human could do. So if you go to the Grand Canyon, you're not just like, it looks like a lot of people got a lot of shovels and just like dug this sucker up. No, not the case, right? This is something that like God did. Shout out, there's that phrase. There you go, thank you. Not intending to do that, but that's truth. But the God of wonders, something that humans couldn't do. Something that only like a good creator could do, all right? So now that we have a little bit of a picture of the God of wonders with you in your depression, right? We're getting a little bit more of a sense of what this is, the God of wonder. So I want you to turn in your Bible to Psalm 77, all right? That's where we're going to be today, Psalm 77. So please, if you have your physical Bible, turn there. If you have your phone, please turn there as well. Please bear with me as I have a little bit of a cough here tonight. So if I cough, I'm sorry. Shout out. If you have your phone, please turn there at Psalm 77. Please stay on the Bible app. Swipe away from the notifications that pop up. That would be great. Psalm 77 is where we're going to be. And this right here is a psalm that you're probably going to go, why are we reading this one tonight, right? This one is a bit of a downer psalm, okay? But Psalm 77 is one that is very important, all right? So I'm going to start here in verse 1 and 2. The verses are up on the screen as well, but please pay attention to each verse that we read here tonight. It says this, I cried out to God with my voice. Shout out. We should be doing sermons on all this stuff because we've been talking about whenever you pray, vocalize it. Whenever you're talking about God, vocalize it. Whenever you're thinking about God, vocalize it. Bring it into the situation that you're in. Don't leave it just in your mind, but with your voice, right? So it says, I cried out to God with my voice. To God with my voice. It's like, didn't you just say that? Yes. Whenever you see things repeated in the Bible, it's like, hey, everyone, set everything down that you're doing and let's focus in on this, all right? So this guy, his name's Asaph, writing this psalm. He says, I cried out to God with my voice, to God with my voice, and he gave ear to me. So he hears what he's crying out. It says, in the day of my trouble, I sought the Lord. That's a great thing to do, right? Whenever you're in a time of trouble, a time of pain, a time of sorrow. Also, some other words that I want to use here that I think you might connect to. If you don't connect to the word a time of depression, you can also think of a time of being stuck, all right? A time where you don't know what decision to go to. Or you can think of a time in which you're hopeless. You can't see past the moment. You don't know how you could ever recover from whatever tragedy just happened or whatever frustration you have. You don't know where to go. You're stuck. So he says, in that day, I sought the Lord. That's a great thing to do, right? That's like what we're always saying. Hey, seek the Lord. Do that even when you're hurting and also whenever you're at your best. Seek the Lord, right? So it says, my hand was stretched out in the night without ceasing. My soul refused to be comforted. You're like, this doesn't sound like the normal happy verses that you hear whenever you come to Driven. And it's like, God loves you and it's nice and this is great. Yes, we're going like serious here. So this is a guy praying. And I'm continually praying. And it says, my soul refused to be comforted, right? So, my soul refused to be comforted. I want you to think in your mind of a time in which you feel like you could not have ease in you. A time in which you were torn. A time in which you were heartbroken. A time in which you had pain, right? So, think of that time. This is what we're talking about right here. In that moment, my soul refused to be comforted. I'm trying the things. Whenever that person says, hey, just pray about it. And you're like, I've tried. My soul is refusing comfort. I don't know what else to do. Let's look at this next verse, verse 3. Fascinating. It says this, Asaph writing, he says, I remembered God and was troubled. He says, I complained and my spirit was overwhelmed. So he's crying out to God, I'm stuck. I'm in a hard spot. I don't know what to do, where to go. I'm experiencing pain. And it says he remembers God, and it says he was troubled. And he complains, and his spirit is overwhelmed. And then it says this right here, it says Selah, all right? So if you've been around church, you may have heard this before, but in the Psalms, you find this word Selah often. You could think of it, because these are songs that have been written, you could think of it like a musical interlude, all right? Shout out. We know what that's like these days. There would be like a musical interlude, and you'd be thinking about the verse that was just sung, or the verse that was just spoken. And it's like, hey, think about that now as we're going over this, right? So let's read it again. I remembered God and was troubled. I complained, and my spirit was overwhelmed. Again, this is a downer verse that it's like, hey, think about that again. You know, hey, think about that, right? Who would actually be so honest, right? And this man Asaph writing saying, I remembered God and I was troubled. And I got to tell other people that. You're going, that doesn't sound very like nice and Christian and like people are going to be cheering you on for that. But I'm remembering what God has done and I'm troubled because I'm crying out and he's not meeting me. He's not hearing me. The thing is not changing. I still have a problem. My soul isn't finding comfort. I'm praying when the person said, pray for that situation and nothing has changed. What do I do? So our first point for today, stick with me on this. Crying out to God, stick with me, does not always cure your depression. You might go, huh? Think of this, okay? So we're seeing this. Crying out to God in this time of prayer, Asa, he's doing the things. Like if he were to come to me, I'd be like, hey, dude, pray about it. Like, let's pray together. Can we focus? Shout out, thank you. Put the phones away. Thank you. Crying out to God does not always cure your depression. Because it's important whenever someone's like, hey, pray about it, there's more than just say a prayer about it, right? So this is not a heretical point right here, but this is something that's very important for us to know. Sometimes there is more action to take than just praying about it, right? So we're going to see here on more in this psalm about what to do more than just pray about it, right? Because just crying out doesn't always cure the depression. So let's see, as Asaph continues to tell about what's going on. Verse 4, it says, you hold my eyelids open. What in the world? It says, I'm so troubled that I cannot speak. I have considered the days of old, the years of ancient times. I call to remembrance my song in the night. I meditate with my heart, and my spirit makes diligent search. So this is a man who is doing the things. He is following the godly counsel. And he's still saying, my soul is not comforted though. I still feel hopeless. I still feel like there's an angst inside. I still feel exhausted. And it's this idea of he's trying to go to sleep, all right? I bet everyone here can relate to this. You're trying to go to sleep, but you just can't. Or you wake up in the middle of the night and you try to go back to sleep and you just can't. So you grab your phone and you scroll and scroll and scroll. And it's like 2 hours go by and then you're like, all right, now I'll go back to sleep, I guess. Not the best thing to do. I've heard it best said whenever you wake up in the middle of the night, hey, start thinking about things you can pray for rather than distract yourself on your phone, right? Because that's not the best thing to do. So he's like, hey, this is the situation I'm in. I woke up or I can't sleep. My eyelids are being held open, but I'm going to remember the old times. I'm going to think about what God has done. It says, I call to remembrance my song in the night. It's fascinating that people used to memorialize moments with songs. Shout out, like if you went to camp and you wrote a song about it or something like that. Unbroken Rain, thank you. That you would remember a time in which God has moved by way of song, right? You would remember it and say, hey, because everyone here can remember songs, right? Like, you know songs. Like forward and backwards. You know all the ups and downs, the ins and outs, the little side harmonies and all that stuff. You're singing the drum fill and all this. It's ridiculous. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm talking about, Nick. Thank you, at least. So there, anyways. But you have that song. You're calling the memories of what God has done into the present time. And that's what's happening here. It says, my spirit makes diligent search. And then we get to these questions that Asaph is going to ask. And it says this. Will the Lord cast off forever? Is he going to push me away forever? These are the feelings that Asaph has inside. And I hope you can say, man, I know what that's like. If you've ever asked the question, is the Lord going to push me aside? Or what's going on aside forever? What in the world? Where is he? Will he be favorable no more? Will he ever show his love again? Have you ever been so real with God that you ask these questions when incredible hurt has happened to you? It says, has his mercy ceased forever? Has his promise failed forevermore? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his tender mercies? And then you get Selah again. You get this idea of like, hey, think over those questions again. So before we go any further, dial in here. Don't let these words just go in one ear, out the other. But think about whenever these questions have been on your heart. Is God going to cast us off forever? Is he ever going to show his love again? Will I ever know his mercy? Am I ever going to experience relief from the pain that I'm experiencing? What am I going to do with all of this? So our second point is that you are to ask the questions of your heart to God. I'm telling you, there's no question too big for him. There's no fear too big for him. There's no frustration. There's no anger. There's no sadness that's too great for him. If you've experienced something in your life that you do not know how to process, don't bottle it up. Don't shove it down. Don't save it for later. Ask the questions of your heart to God. If you can't ask it to anyone else, ask it to God. If you're going to ask it to someone else, ask it to God first, then talk to someone else as well, right? You're not going to offend God with something you've done. He knows what you've done. He's the ever-present God. He knows everything you're doing. He knows the things you're hiding. He knows the things you've been through. He knows your story. So ask the questions of your heart to God. He can handle it. Odds are he actually wants to hear you voice your pain to him so that he knows my child trusts me to answer them, right? So we're to ask our questions to God. So this is where it just gets incredibly, exponentially awesome to me. Here we go in verse 10. It says this, and I said, this is my anguish, as in I'm laying it all out here. This is my anguish, but I will remember the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember God ruling. I will remember his strength, right? It says, I will remember the works of the Lord. Surely I will remember your wonders of old. This is the verse on the front of your notes here, so please fill it out. This is like, I'm telling you, such an awesome verse right here. This is crying out to God with the pain you're going through, knowing, hey, I voiced this, but here's what I'm going to do now. I know that just crying out isn't going to solve everything, so now I'm taking the action of remembering what God has done. What God has done in someone else's life, knowing that he's been faithful to someone else, and if he's been faithful to someone else, he can be faithful to you as well. It's important to not have the shallow relationships where you never talk about God. That right there, I would say, is a trash relationship. I'm sorry to say it. But if you don't ever talk about God in your relationship, you need to start bringing God into that relationship. And you need to ask the question, what has God done in your life? And you need to share, this is what God has done in my life. I want you to know what he's done, and I want to know what he's done in your life so I can remember whenever you're like, man, I'm going through something. Good thing you have a leader who has talked to you and has been open to you, and you can remember God's been faithful to them. I know he can be faithful to me, right? That is why I'm like so huge on talk to someone. Talk to a leader. Please, talk to me. You're not going to offend me with things that you've done, I promise you. Because I know who God is. I know his love for his people. So talk to someone, right? And remember what God has done. So it's interesting. I heard something recently saying how God's people have amnesia. Do you know what amnesia is? It's where you forget all the things that have happened. There you go. You forget the moments that have happened in your life. I heard a thing, it was like God's people have the most extreme case of amnesia ever. Specifically, you think of the story of the Exodus, all right? God leads the Israelites out of Egypt through the Red Sea, and then right after, they're wandering in the desert for 40 years, and they're making idols and all this stuff. Right after, God has literally delivered them from slavery, insanity. And they're no, we're going to celebrate our own God after God literally does something only he could do. Same thing with the disciples. You think about those who literally followed with Jesus. You think about those who literally performed miracles. And then it's he dies. And they're forget it all. See ya. We're done. all this was fake, or you forget about all of it, right? You have like the worst case of amnesia. I think the same exact thing can happen to us. We can have incredible experiences with God. You can be confronted with the absolute conviction of God right in your heart. And then you can be like, yeah, probably not true. Probably just forget about it. I'll just move on. I'll just act like everything's normal. And I'm not even going to think another thing about it. What are we doing? What are we doing? We need to remember what God has done, right? So look at verse 12. It says this, I will also meditate on all your work and talk of your deeds. Your way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God? It says, you are the God who does, shout out, wonders. There you go. Sermon title, imagine. You are the God who does wonders. You have declared your strength among the peoples. You have with your arm redeemed your people, the sons of Jacob and Joseph. Selah. Again, think about that line. God is a redeemer. So again, like I said at the beginning, God still does wonders today. That is our third point. God still does wonders today. At the moment in your life that you're like, there's no way things could change. I'm always going to be this way. My parent is always going to be that way. My sibling is always going to be that way. I'm never going to amount to fill in the blank. I'm only as good as my anxieties. I'm only as good as the label I put on myself. I'm telling you, God still does wonders today. Don't limit God by what you can see. If that was the case, if God was only able to do what only we could think of, that would not be God. God is a God of wonders, right? He does more than we could ask, think, or imagine, right? So whatever problem that you have that you think God could not change, I dare you to trust that he could. I dare you to believe that he would change your parent. I dare you to believe he might change that friend that's an unbeliever. And be relentless about it. And cling to the fact that God is a good God who does wonders. God can save me out of this time that I feel stuck. God can save me out of this time that I don't know where to go, right? God still does wonders today. So to finish the psalm, it's awesome. Asaph is like, I'm recalling this, and this, I need to tell others of the wonders in which God has done. I'm remembering this. So it says this, as he's recalling the story of the people of Israel being led through the Red Sea. It says, the waters saw you, O God. The waters saw you. They were afraid. The depths also trembled. It said, the clouds poured out water. The skies sent out a sound. Your arrows also flashed about. The voice of your thunder was in the whirlwind. The lightnings lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. These are all wondrous things, yes? And then verse 19, it says, your way was in the sea, your path in the great waters, and your footsteps were not known. It says, you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. And then the psalm stops. It just stops right there. It's like, you feel like you're just building up to this like monumental story. And the implication here is like, hey, these are the things God has done. Now you tell the story. What is God doing in your life? You recall the things that God has done in your family's life, in your friend's life, in that youth leader's life, and whatever it is, recall that, remember that, and tell of that. Whenever you're in that time of, I'm crying out, don't just be like, well, I've just cried out and God doesn't hear me and I'm throwing in the towel. No. We're to be people who are persistent. So we cry out and we recall, right? So with all of that, I want us to go into our discussion groups and have plenty of time to be able to talk about this topic right here, the God of wonders with you in your depression. So, point right here. What wonders of God do you need to recall? What great things that God has done do you need to remember? So I want in the discussion group times, you'll have the opportunity to talk with others and say, this is what God's done in my life. These are things that I cling to whenever things are hard for me, right? So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to have discussion groups. God, we thank you that you are a God who still does miracles today. Lord, I pray that you would open the eyes of these students and leaders here of your wonders that you still do. I pray that we would continually recall of your greatness, your character, your love, and that would change us, even in where we feel stuck, where we feel depressed, where we feel hopeless. Lord, I pray that there would be a peace and a hope after these discussion groups. Lord, we pray these things in your name. Amen.